Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special council meeting on August 25th, 2025. Individuals interested in participating in today's meeting were eligible to register online using the delegation registration form at www.kitchener.ca/delegation or via email at delegation@kitchener.ca. Any written comments received prior to the commencement of today's meeting have been circulated to members of council prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. The meeting live stream and archive videos are available at www.kitchener.ca/watchnow. Before we begin today's meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that today we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, and there being no delegations for this portion of the meeting, we'll move right into the agenda, and we'll start with the community grants review update. In fact, that is our only item on the agenda other than the in-camera items later on, and I'll turn it over to Alan Morlag, our Manager of Service Coordination and Improvement, who will kick things off. And I'll also note that Mike Crawford of the Mahalam Consulting Group is in attendance virtually to respond to questions if required. And Ellen, I will turn it over to you. I will note that we do have one member of council who is joining us virtually at this point in time. So over to you, Ellen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so hello members of council. I'm happy to be here today to share some highlights from the comprehensive community grants review that's been ongoing throughout 2025, and to present some of the best practices that were identified as foundational for addressing the community grant program's most pressing challenges. This session is meant to be an opportunity for information sharing and discussion prior to going back out to the community to share key findings from the review and begin to draft recommendations for change. So to give you a bit of background about community grants at the city, the program was created 16 years ago in 2008 as part of the city's community investment policy. There was a preliminary review of the program completed in 2019, where one of the key recommendations to surface was the need for a comprehensive review in order to update the program's purpose, criteria, assessment methods, and overall administration. Taking immediate action on this recommendation was delayed with the onset of the COVID pandemic in 2020, but was added as a priority to the city's 2023-2026 strategic plan under Fostering a Caring City Together. So the three main components of the program that have remained constant since 2008 and were the focus of this review are Tier 1 grants, Tier 2 grants, and in-kind facility grants. All of the other grants that are provided by the City of Kitchener were out of scope for this review. So Tier 1 grants are awarded to community organizations on a non-competitive rolling annual basis and currently account for 85% of the total funding envelope. The average annual grant allocation for Tier 1 groups is about $14,000, though the range is quite large, with some groups receiving less than $500 and others over $250,000 per year. Tier 2 grants are awarded on an annual competitive cycle where community organizations apply for funding within the areas of art and entertainment, special events, sport and recreation, and community support or development. Once organizations have received Tier 2 for a period of 5 consecutive years, they are then placed into Tier 1. The Tier 2 granting stream typically accounts for 15% of the city's total community grant funding on an annual basis, and the annual grant allocations for Tier 2 groups is about $4,000. In-kind facility grants are non-cash facility grants provided to groups and organizations offering events to the general public in City of Kitchener facilities. The grants are used by groups to cover rental and staff costs for basic setup, and in-kind facility grants can be accessed in two ways. There is a separate grant groups can apply for up to $500 per year, or in-kind funds can be folded into both, or either Tier 1 or Tier 2 grant funds as part of the total amount awarded to the organization. Wait, sorry. Okay. So over the past 16 years, while this community grants funding model has been in place, the city and its communities have undergone significant transformation, shifting demographic trends, accelerated population growth, changes in the funding landscape, and substantial societal changes due to the pandemic, politics, environmental, and equity concerns gaining prominence have all contributed to evolving community needs and priorities. While the grant program has continued to serve local organizations throughout this time, it has become clear that its original design no longer fully aligns with or most effectively supports the city's broader strategic goals, particularly in the areas of user experience, transparency, accountability, equity, and excellence in customer service. So in 2024, the city launched the process to engage an external consultant to complete a comprehensive review of the community grants program. And over the course of this grants review, which officially began in March of 2025 with the onboarding of Mahalam Consulting Group, the following research and evaluation activities took place, which included targeted community engagement with 90 community grant recipients and applicants through surveys, interviews, and focus groups, benchmarking against a comparative group of 15 lower-tier municipalities within Southern Ontario, environmental scan of grant-making practices with over 40 municipalities across Canada, a current state assessment of our community grants policies, processes, and practices, as well as research into best practices. And the next step in the community grants review will be to share key findings and identified best practices with grant recipients and applicants who participated in the targeted community engagement in order to validate the findings, offer opportunities for feedback, and support the creation of grant recommendations. This second round of community engagement will take place in the fall of 2025. All right, so in sharing some of the key findings, I'm going to start with the program's strengths, and in particular, the three main ones that are identified throughout the engagement. So the first is our grants program provides consistent support for community organizations. Many organizations reported that the city's community grant is their most stable or only reliable source of operational funding, and some describe the grant as essential to their continued existence. The second is robust funding investment in community grants. Findings from the financial benchmarking component of the review indicate that Kitchener's investment in community grants is robust at $5.80 per capita, which is 0.32% of our gross operating budget, which puts us second highest in per capita funding and fourth highest by budget share among the 15 lower tier municipalities reviewed. And we'll get into that in more detail in a later slide. And the third strength is predictable multi-year funding through the Tier 1 grants. Kitchener offers multi-year funding through its Tier 1 grant stream, which is open-ended in duration and non-competitive once admission is granted, allowing organizations to remain in the program indefinitely without the need to compete for funds against other applicants. So before I dive into the challenges that surfaced as part of the review, a quick note. Due to the fact that the Tier 1 grants program is a non-competitive grant stream that is not available to community organizations to apply for, the majority of the findings from the review are focused on the application, review, and granting processes for the Tier 2 community grant program, which does run on an annual cycle. It is worth noting, though, that one of the prominent themes to come out of this review is the significant incompatibility between the total funding provided to the community and the amount of time and effort being asked of predominantly volunteer members of grassroots and not-for-profit organizations in order to receive Tier 2 funding in comparison to those organizations who are receiving Tier 1. So the challenges that I will be presenting have been summarized into 4 categories, the first of which is customer experience. So from the user experience perspective, engagement findings indicate that the Tier 2 community grant application is a significant burden on applicants, and that Kitchener's Tier 2 grant application was the longest in comparison to all peer municipalities at 18 pages. Further, unclear and confusing application guidelines and the absence of a publicly available eligibility screener contributed to inefficiency and confusion for applicants. Budget templates and financial documents were reported to be the most difficult parts of the application. Many respondents found them to be poorly aligned with their realities, and the volunteers often don't have the financial literacy to complete them. The Tier 2 application process also lacks transparency on funding amounts, typical grant sizes, and evaluation criteria, which results in volunteer-run organizations wasting time applying for grant amounts that are completely unrealistic, particularly when asking for way more funding than Tier 2 can provide them. The next challenge that came up in the review is strategic alignment as well as program structure. So the second challenge, the current grants program is not fully aligned with the council-approved strategic priorities as outlined in the city's strategic plan. It was intended to be when the program was created in 2008, but because there hasn't been a review or any updates since then, it is no longer aligned with the priorities as outlined in the city's strategic plan. As a result, funding provided to the community is likely not being used most effectively to advance council's top priorities. Nowhere in the application process are applicants told what the city's priorities are, or how to align their work with the city's priorities, or whether alignment significantly impacts funding decisions. And Kitchener applies a uniform assessment process for all Tier 2 applications with no lower barrier options or differentiated supports for small, emerging, and/or equity-deserving organizations. And further, Kitchener's current grant process doesn't organize its grant funding by themes. So although it funds a mix of arts, culture, community development, festivals, and sports, these categories are combined under a single program with no internal allocation by theme, which means arts groups are competing with community development organizations or sports groups for the same funds. Kitchener is also the only lower-tier municipality in the benchmark group to integrate a formal in-kind facility grants program. Engagement feedback revealed that while in-kind facility access is a valuable aspect of the community grants program, it often falls short of meeting organizations' needs. Did I do something? Okay, thank you. All right, so the next challenge that came up is transparency. This was revealed to be an important concern throughout many components of the review. Applicants frequently cited a lack of clarity around evaluation criteria, decision-making, the evaluation and review process, and the rationale for funding amounts. Tier distinctions were poorly understood by many applicants, and grant recipients and perceived Tier 1 as inequitable by many. Transparency was also viewed as a concern with funding allocations between Tier 1 and Tier 2 streams and the reporting model for grant recipients. The last challenge to be identified as part of the review is related to equity. So the Community Grants Program demonstrates an intention to engage with EDI principles, but currently lacks mechanisms to make these intentions actionable. Feedback from grant applicants and recipients reveal persistent structural inequalities in how the Community Grants Program supports equity. Barriers were reported across eligibility, decision-making, and support structures, particularly for grassroots, newcomer-led, culturally specific, and emerging organizations. And again, Kitchener's Tier 1 funding model, unique from all other municipal peers as a non-competitive rolling funding stream and open-ended in duration, is viewed as inequitable by many recipients and applicants. So in light of some of the challenges that I've highlighted here, I will be presenting 10 best practices for consideration and discussion. So most peer municipalities use their best practices in grant making were identified across all dimensions of the comprehensive review. And these 10 are supported by data and engagement input, and if implemented, would directly advance the review's 4 objectives around strategic alignment, supporting community organizations, equity, and improved customer service user experience. So number 1 is integration of council-approved strategic priorities into the program design. So as I mentioned, when the program was created, the intention was to align the program with strategic direction at the city. But due to the amount of time that has passed, this is not something that is currently happening. And so most peer municipalities do use their grants program to operationalize council-approved strategic plans and frameworks. These typically include overarching strategies such as community well-being plans, arts and culture strategies, equity and inclusion policies, reconciliation commitments, and climate or sustainability goals. Jurisdictions differ in how clearly these priorities are communicated. Stronger examples provide detailed program guidelines and stream-specific objectives that explicitly connect to strategic pillars like equity, belonging, health, or vibrancy. These frameworks are often accompanied by defined outcomes and criteria that guide funding decisions and applicant expectations. Number 2 is simple and clear eligibility criteria, which is really directly linked to number 1, which is clarifying the strategic priorities within the program. So municipalities use eligibility criteria as a core mechanism to ensure that public grant funds are directed to appropriate, capable, and community-serving organizations. Best practices in eligibility requirements include providing clear categories such as who can apply, what we fund, and what we do not fund. And some peer municipalities include eligibility checklists and illustrative examples to aid applicant understanding. Best practices also reflect a service mindset, focusing on who can apply and for what, rather than a compliance mindset that emphasizes exclusion. Strong examples show eligibility criteria that is clearly defined, free of ambiguity, and based on objective thresholds that applicants can self-assess against. This improves transparency, reduces inconsistency in screening, and ensures fairness. Number 3 is clear and robust guidelines. So guidelines inform applicants of key informational needs. Most of the municipalities in the benchmark provide guidelines as downloadable PDFs, consolidating all relevant program information in one place, which allows applicants to easily review, print, annotate, and share the material. The best guidelines outline the grant program's objectives, strategic priorities, associated outcomes, and example results. Guidelines, according to the best practices, should be written in plain, respectful language that welcomes applicants and reflects a service-oriented tone. Number 4 is application accessibility and ease of use. Best practices strongly indicate that application complexity should scale to the size and type of the grant. This respects applicants' time and ensures that effort is appropriate to the value of funding. Strong systems avoid requesting information that isn't evaluated, overusing open text prompts, or asking applicants for data already held by the funder. The median length of an application form in the benchmark group was 7 to 12 pages, and strong applications present eligibility criteria up front to prevent applicants from proceeding unnecessarily. Well-designed forms use visual cues to support navigation through heading, spacing, and grouped content. Forms should reference relevant plans, provide short summaries or prompts, and offer examples of outcomes that meet alignment expectations. Number 5 is separate granting portfolios within the community grants program. So municipalities that take a portfolio approach to grant making, anchored in clearly defined themes attached to funding ratios, are better positioned to support the full spectrum of the nonprofit ecosystem. This approach recognizes that different organizations contribute in different ways and that equitable, effective public investment must respond to a range of needs, capacities, and roles across the sector. In doing this, many municipalities defined fixed funding percentages for each thematic area to balance support, transparency, and responsiveness. Peer municipalities increasingly provide support for arts via dedicated grants programs as a means of bolstering core civic arts-based institutions by peer municipalities. So best practices point to establishing a dedicated program for arts and special events, or arts and entertainment, with distinct eligibility criteria, application forms, and a unique review process administered by the arts-focused municipal team and volunteer industry experts. So this is the case in many municipalities where they have an arts council or a specific arts fund that the municipality contributes to. There's many different ways of doing this, but generally professional arts and entertainment grants are not included in the grassroots community grants application process. Number 6 is competitive multi-year funding. So many municipalities provide multi-year funding as a strategic tool to strengthen organizational stability, reduce administrative burden, and support long-term service planning. Multi-year agreements are typically structured with limited renewable terms based on periodic competitive review. This maintains stability while allowing for reassessment of fit or performance. Entry into multi-year funding is typically merit-based and transparent, with selection grounded in demonstrated impact, financial health, and alignment with municipal priorities rather than historical funding alone. Terms are typically between 2 and 5 years, with an average of 3, and once the term is complete, all recipients must reapply through the standard competitive process on an equal basis. Multi-year funding recipients are organizations typically seen as integral to the municipality's strategic goals, widely accessible, and impactful across priority populations. Best practices within multi-year funding programs point to the necessity of streamlined reporting requirements and robust financial oversight. To ensure fairness, multi-year funding must be accessible to a wide range of organizations, including those historically excluded. Entry pathways should be clear and equity and distribution actively monitored. So I'm just going to return to a previous point that I made around the funding benchmarking analysis that was done. And just to provide some additional context. So the multi-year funding comparisons that were made with other municipalities are on the screen here. So we have Kitchener with our total funding envelope of $1.77 million. This is for 2024. Which ends up being $5.80 per capita and 0.32% of our overall gross operating budget. And in comparison to the 15 lower tier municipalities in Southern Ontario and then some 9 additional single tier municipalities in Southern Ontario, this is where Kitchener sits right now. And these 2 different colors on the bar graph represent competitive versus non-competitive funding. And the benchmarking was actually done against all other municipalities who have their community grants as competitive, because there was no other municipality that had the same process as us. And so since Kitchener's Tier 1 funding is allocated on a non-competitive rolling basis and is not open to public application, which is unique, as I mentioned, compared to peer municipalities, 87% of the funding granted through our grants program is not directly comparable to other municipalities. If we're looking at funds available to the public on a competitive basis, as other peer municipalities do, which only applies to the Tier 2 funding, which is 15% and about $220,000 per year currently, our investment drops to 90 cents per capita and just 0.04% of the city's operating budget. So this is among the lowest in the lower tier peer group. Whereas the numbers that are on the screen here are the averages per capita in grant funding for lower tier and single tier. So we've got for lower tier, it's typically lower at $2.80 per capita, and single tier, such as Hamilton, is the average is 6.5 per capita. So number 7 is focused on supports for smaller or new emerging and equity deserving organizations. So best practices in this area combine individualized assistance with accessible toolkits and guidance materials that support applicants from start to finish. Equity-oriented supports include assigning equity liaisons, hosting targeted info sessions, or providing technical assistance through partnerships with intermediary organizations. Direct access to knowledgeable program staff is a cornerstone of best practices as well, particularly for equity-deserving groups, high-value or complex requests. Programs often pair these with live and recorded webinars, downloadable slide decks, and plain language FAQs that applicants can refer to independently. These resources ensure applicants receive consistent information and reduce the burden on staff by preempting common questions. Number 8 is transparency in decision-making. So across the peer group, 70% of municipalities state their evaluation criteria, and those with stronger evaluation design typically include a complete list of review criteria, assigned weights or scores for each, brief explanations or guiding questions, and a description of how decisions are made and by whom. A well-defined evaluation framework ensures that funding decisions are aligned with program goals, consistently applied across applicants, and understandable to both reviewers and the public. The absence of clear evaluation frameworks reduces applicant confidence and increases the risk of inconsistency in responses as well as funding decisions. When expectations are not transparent, experienced applicants may navigate the process more effectively, while newer or equity-deserving groups are disadvantaged. Number 9 is focused on embedding EDI principles across the program. So grant programs that integrate EDI principles throughout their policies and practices are most likely to succeed on those objectives, and best practices call for a whole system approach where equity is integrated as a defining lens across all stages of program design, delivery, and evaluation. Strong equity integration should be formally embedded within the stated purpose and goals of the grant program, aligning funding objectives with community need, and identifying measurable outcomes as indicators for success. The final best practice is municipal in-kind supports. So as I mentioned, Kitchener is the only lower tier municipality in the benchmark group to integrate a formal in-kind grants program. While in-kind contributions represent modest direct costs, they often involve significant operational impacts, where approvals are decentralized or not coordinated across departments. Staff time, custodial supports, and scheduling complexity can exceed the value of the waived fees in many cases. Equity issues are common among in-kind support programs as well. A first-come, first-served model tends to favor experienced or well-resourced groups, leaving newer or equity-deserving organizations with limited access. And informal or department-level decision-making can further reinforce these patterns. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Crawford of Mahalam Consulting to just do a quick one-slide overview of some of the top elements of the review that he would like to share. So I'll just turn that.
Mr. Crawford?
I'm just trying to advance the slide. It's not working. Okay.
Seems like Mr. Crawford's not there. Oh, there. Is he there?
Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Crawford.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry about that. So I'd just like to speak to the four most significant findings, which echo much of what Ellen has already spoken about. So number one is the clarity of strategic objectives. In the key findings on this matter, we found that obviously, as Ellen mentioned, that the current program doesn't operationalize the strategic plan. It references it and it alludes to and aspires to fulfilling it, but it doesn't operationalize it to the fullest degree possible. Because there's no outcomes or guidance in the grant program material, applicants have to self-interpret alignment and how they are fulfilling the city's mandate. And this leads to suboptimal outcomes based on the feedback from the engagement. As well as that, equity and EDI principles are absent from the evaluation framework. So there's a missed opportunity to fully integrate those into the grants program. And all of this leads to applicants being confused about what to align with, as well as feeling a little bit disconnected from the city's stated priorities in terms of seeing what's funded and what is not. This matters
Mr. Crawford, we've lost you.
because the investment in the community grants program, and it helps applicants understand expectations, which reduces administrative load. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll just back up a few seconds there. So this matters because it improves the program outcomes. It communicates the intent and value of the investment in the community grants program, and it helps the applicants understand expectations, as well as providing transparency and consistency, which builds trust among community stakeholders and residents. The next finding was on multi-year funding. As we've noted already, over 85% of the total funding envelope is in Tier 1, leaving a much smaller amount, about $220,000 left for Tier 2 competitive funding. The funding and perpetuity model means that once admitted, organizations remain, which is unique among the benchmark group. This has a knockdown effect on the Tier 2 applicants who are left competing for a much smaller pool of funding. This matters because the current Tier 1 program is a missed opportunity to ensure value for money. There's opportunities as well to increase accountability and ensure that the program funding targets are aligned with city priorities, as well as providing opportunity for new and emerging groups. Evaluation transparency matters, and transparency in the program as a whole were consistently noted throughout multiple dimensions of analysis, from community engagement, best practices, the research, as well as the benchmarking process. The evaluation criteria not published. The applicants do not know why their program or their proposals were accepted or denied. And it results in many applicants with similar scores making prioritization and final decision-making a challenge, which can lead to more appeals and concerns among applicants. And finally, in-kind supports. Kitchener is the only municipality that has a specific in-kind facility grant program. Most other municipalities provide facility fee, rental, or discounts or objectives. And this matters because reducing... Okay, sorry, I think you just lost me for a second.
Yeah, Mr. Crawford, we've lost you several times, actually. You come back and then you speed up and you lose you again and so on. So if you can maybe just try to wrap it up and then we can have staff ask, or we can have council ask questions.
Sure. So the in-kind supports matters because reducing barriers for grassroots and volunteer-led groups would be supported by having in-kind facility programs that are more broadly eligible outside the grant program and it would streamline the administrative and operational expenses and increase supports across the entire nonprofit ecosystem. I think there's a buffering issue on the software on my side here, so apologies for that, but that's the end of my part, and I'm ready to answer questions if desired.
Okay, thank you very much. Alan, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or you're done? Okay. We have several people in the queue, so I'll go to members of council and then myself. I'll start with Councillor Davey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm noting that this item is for discussion, so I'm assuming it's not just questions, more conversation.
Yes, yes. So questions and feedback that you can provide to staff for further, that will shape the direction of the work that they're going.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Yeah, I have a few questions. The first question I have is, I guess I always struggle with the silos of our grants, and I'm trying to understand how the funding, you showed us quite high in terms of comparison to other lower tier municipalities in terms of grant funding, but how do our other grants like Love My Hood and the RISE fund that we have relate to other municipalities, and why aren't they included in this report?
Ms. Morlag?
So through the chair, we did not include those grants as part of the scope of this review. So I don't actually have any stats on that.
Do we know anecdotally if other, just I guess I'm looking for staff's opinion, do many other or most other municipalities have something similar to Love My Hood or the RISE?
Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can tell you that the Love My Hood grant, in terms of its size and scale, is very unique across Canada. There's a couple of cities out west. Other cities have them, but at a much smaller scale. And then in terms of a RISE grant, I do know that the idea of an equity-focused grant is something that's grown over the past several years. So my anecdotal evidence would be that there are many municipalities that have it, but I can't speak to the level of funding.
Okay, thank you. Would either the Love My Hood grant or the RISE Fund grant count as a competitive grant?
Ms. Morlag?
Sorry, what was that?
So the question was, would Love My Hood or the RISE grant apply as a competitive grant? I mean, I think the answer is yes, but Mr. May?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, maybe it's my opportunity to just be really clear about this. Absolutely, they're competitive grants because in order to get the money, you have to apply and compete against other groups that are applying. Tier 1, a community group cannot apply for that funding. That's why it is a non-competitive grant. You receive Tier 1, you move into Tier 1 after having applied for Tier 2 for 5 years, and at which point you move to Tier 1. So it's not competitive. That's when we say it's a non-competitive, they get that grant without having to compete against other groups.
Okay, great. So then I guess, again, though, I would say we were painted in a bad light on the slide. If we can go back, I'm going to ask the question what the annual allocation is for the RISE Fund and for Love My Hood grants. I believe RISE is 150,000. I don't know what Love My Hood is offhand. Sorry, I'm asking what the annual budget is for the RISE Fund and Love My Hood. I believe RISE is 150, unless I'm mistaken. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can certainly email that to council.
We don't know what the annual budget is for grants for Love My Hood?
I do not.
An estimation, it's over $100,000.
I'll take your word on it. I don't know the number.
Can we go back to the slide comparing us our competitive grants?
Yeah, that was,
Oh, no,
yeah, it was the one with the bar graph.
Forward with the graph.
graph.
The bar graph, yeah.
Yep.
Right, so, yeah, so looking at that 0.9 is the $230,000 only in our Tier 2 grants. If you add $150,000 from RISE to that, and you add, I'm not even sure the amount, but a significant amount from Love My Hood, that puts us, my understanding, well above the lower tier average. I just want to understand, I guess my feedback would be when this comes back, I want this information to be included, or why wouldn't it be included?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're happy to include that information. It's not included because this review is very specific to a program council approved 16 years ago, which is the Community Investment Fund, which only included Tier 1, Tier 2, and the in-kind facility grants. So this review was never including all of those other grants. Having said that, we're happy to look at those numbers when we come back in the fall.
Okay, and when we look at those numbers, and I'll cue back in, Mr. Mayor, after I ask this last question, a theme throughout this entire report was to address equity and fairness, diversity, inclusion. If you were to include that $150,000 from the RISE fund, that's approximately 60-70%, I would say, of our current Tier 2. Would that change staff's recommendation in terms of making EDI high priority for Tier 2? Because again, my understanding is non-equity seeking people are not allowed to apply for the RISE fund, and it's 65% of this total.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, just to be really clear, staff don't have any recommendations on this right now.
Right, yeah, this is discussion.
Yeah, so we're not, your point about would it change our recommendation? We haven't come up with a recommendation.
Okay, I'll cue back in then, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Ms. Morlag?
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that if we were to include the RISE Fund and the Love My Hood grant as part of our competitive funding amount, then we would have to include those for all the other municipalities in the benchmark as well, which would then make them go up as well, because they were not included. There's lots of municipalities that do have equity-focused funds that were not included in the benchmarking for this review, as well as anything that wasn't considered a community grants program that was comparable to our program. So the comparability was really the key when it comes to benchmarking. And so those other grants weren't included for other municipalities. Just to, if you do want to see those comparisons.
So just before I go to Councillor Singh, who's next, just to follow up on that, are you saying that when we look at that comparator that's there, we're 100% comparing apples to apples and not apples to maybe apples and a few oranges?
It's not, I mean, we can't really find apples, like it's as close as we could possibly get. So we looked at other municipalities where their community grants fund arts and culture, sports and rec, and community supports and development. It excluded all social services grants that some municipalities covers, particularly single tier, because we don't do those. It excluded equity-focused grants like the RISE Fund. It excluded the smaller grassroots community grants, neighborhood development, those kinds of things that are separate from the actual community grants program. So yeah, we were trying to get a close a match as possible, with the caveat that there is quite a bit of variability within municipalities.
But just, sorry, I'll come to you 1 second, Councillor Singh, but just to be clear, you said it included some athletic grants, and I guess there's a small number in there, but the reality is there's a whole pile of sport groups, like who get preferred rates and so on, but aren't grants per se, they're just the way we structure it in.
So would it
so
be,
that wouldn't be included?
No.
Okay.
And what the benchmarking found is that very few municipalities actually provide community grants for sports groups, likely because of a lot of the other things that they're doing for sports groups as well. So.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Councillor Singh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the large takeaway for me through this report was just to see that 1.77 million. It just goes to show the overall level of commitment from this council and as a community to support and fund our various organizations across the city. I did a quick search on ChatGPT. It's 200,000 for Love My Hood. I think 87,000 is extra from the Lyle Hallman Fund. So, I mean, that's another point, but I think we should be training a large learning model for AI so that we never not have any data before our hands, but I think soon enough we will get there. Anyways, coming back to the matter at hand. So one of the not recommendations, but the directions or what other cities do as well is a arts council. That's not something, well, I guess art council or like a community grant funding council. Would that require a staffing resource as well if you were to go in that direction? Are you looking to receive feedback if there's a council involvement if we were to go with that direction. Just wanted a staff perspective.
So through the chair, so I think the larger best practice that we're looking at is thematic support within the community grants. Because right now we have, arts groups competing against sports groups who are competing against, small neighborhood association groups, all for the same pot of funding. And so what the best practices revealed is that other municipalities typically will have funding ratios within the grant. So if we have $220,000, we would say, 30% would go towards this group, 40% would go towards this group. That would be based on our priorities. But in addition to that thematic funding, most other organizations actually separate out the arts grants from their community grants, because not all the arts funds, but more professional arts and entertainment, special events type funds that are seen as large components of the community and that are necessary and integral to our community and culture of the city. And so that those organizations are not competing against a small, local-led organization for the same funds. And so in the best practices, some municipalities, typically they tend to be the upper tier or the single tier municipalities will have a separate arts council or an arts fund that they will put separate money in, which would be adjudicated and run by a separate staffing group. And in this case, if we were to go that model, that would be a possibility in this case in terms of, and the reason for that is because of the level of expertise needed to review and oversee, professional grants and entertainment.
I'm not discouraging it. I was
Yeah.
asking, is it likely a staff resource that's required if you were to go to that arts
Yes.
council
Yes, the
direction?
answer would be
Okay,
yes,
that was
yeah.
really the question
Yep.
at hand. I understood all the earlier parts.
Okay.
So, okay, that's something we should be cognizant of. But
absolutely.
mind you, and this is kind of commentary and questions at the same time with the remaining time, is that I do like the transparency. I think there should be a segregation so we have a better idea, especially from the overall tier funding where it's arts related. I think it gives us a better idea when community members question, hey, what's your commitment to the arts community? I think we really think about what we do for the museum, what we do for the Center in the Square or towards KWAG, but realizing out of that 1.77 million, how much is going towards the arts community is a good idea for us to have a
Yeah.
better handle. Very quickly, I had a few other questions. I may have to swing back in, so try to be please concise on the answers. The 2.5-year kind of funding, this through tier one, they would have to requalify after the 2 to 5 years at that point?
So in the best practices or in our current system?
Both, quick answer on both.
Okay, so I can answer both. So in our current system, we do have multi-year agreements with tier one organizations, and those multi-year agreements are between 1 and 5 years. It really depends on the group, and at the end of that, they do have to present their eligibility in terms of they have to be a registered not-for-profit, they have to have insurance, there's several other things. But there is a process that they have to go through, which is viewed through the lens of the eligibility for tier one, but it's not an application and they're not applying for funds in competition with other organizations. So right now they do have to sort of reapply for the intention to continue the funding in our multi-year agreements.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'll probably kick it back in.
Okay.
Sorry, I was short, Ellen. I was trying to get to all the questions. These guys complain I talk too much already anyways, and just we'll go back and do a little bit quick, faster question and answer in the
But
next
do you
round.
want me
Thanks.
to answer the second
no,
part?
I'll come back again,
Okay,
yeah.
you'll come back, okay.
Councillor Ioannidis, and then Jason was next, but the system seems to be bumping him as other people come into the list. So then it was Jason, Councillor Deneau, then Councillor Chapman, and then Councillors Davy and Singh for your second round. So Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic, and great questions so far in discussion. I guess I'm a little bit confused with regards to the in-kind portion of this. I know it's something that, it's been dealt with and talked about with staff for many, many years. So is there like some kind of suggestion in here? I didn't understand that part.
Okay, yeah, so we're not making recommendations. This is just best practices for what other municipalities do. As I mentioned in the presentation, so Kitchener is the only one that rolls official in-kind support into the grants process. Other organizations will typically do things like fee waivers, or certain groups, there'll be like sliding scales for certain groups that will be part of the rental process, rather than, so right now, for some Tier 1 and Tier 2 organizations, they'll receive, $7,500 as their total grant. 3,000 of that will be in-kind, 4,500 will be cash, and the in-kind will be used because they've indicated they need that money to use the Victoria Park Pavilion or use, the rotunda and different things like that. The issue that has come up is as our population has grown, as we've readjusted our operating model for community centers and how community centers are used, and as we're just doing a lot more programming within all of our facilities, there is less opportunity for community groups to have access to the facilities within the time frame that they're looking for, because it's often centered around a very common time frame, like over the summer or something. And so the in-kind, so other municipalities just have done away with it completely, and they just give, the full $7,500 in cash, and if organizations are able to use facilities, they'll pay for them. If they're not, they'll find a facility elsewhere.
Okay, so
that-
if we remove the in-kind, wouldn't that increase the costs?
No, because all of the in-kind is included in our entire funding envelope. So of the 1.7 million of all of our funding, a certain proportion of that is in-kind.
Okay, I understand
Yeah.
that. I guess my other question would be with regard to, I like where the direction is somewhat going, to be transparent and everything, but I also don't want to be seen as giving away money. Like, I feel like with the times that we're in right now, and the challenges, I feel like we need to be more scrutinize more of our funding and how we give it out. And I feel like this is kind of like the opposite direction. This just feels like that to me. I'm not sure if is that
So I can maybe speak to that. So right now, as Mr. May mentioned in his response, right now, 85% of our funding envelope is given out in a non-competitive basis. And so we're giving out funds to groups who've been placed into Tier 1 from as early as 2009 when the program started, and they are continuing to get funding year after year without having to compete for it. And what we're bringing to you is actually a series of best practices that other municipalities are doing where multi-year funding is done at other municipalities, but it's competitive. So an organization would apply, they'd get 3 years of funding, and then after those 3 years, they would go back into the pool and they'd have to reapply again. And so I think what we're looking at is actually a more accountable model that other municipalities are doing, as opposed to the way that our system is run right now.
One of the things too, and I like that response, I don't disagree with that portion. When I hear best practices from other municipalities, that kind of raises the hair in the back of my neck, because I feel like, how do we know that those municipalities are operating efficiently and everything else? Just because a ton of other municipalities does certain things doesn't mean it's the best practice, is what I'm trying to say. So how do we know, how do we verify that those programs are actually doing the right things and being efficient and everything else? Because I don't know, that word really bothers me.
I mean, it's a fair point. I think overall, what we're doing is benchmarking an environmental scan on a sort of larger scale. But I'm actually going to turn this over to Mike Crawford of Mahalam Group, because he's the one who has really been digging deep into the best practices and being able to identify what's considered a best practice and what is just simply benchmarking or looking at what they're doing. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Crawford?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes. So, Councillor Ioannidis, I somewhat agree with you on best practices. It's a subjective term. We addressed that by looking at as wide of a group as we could, looking at just the 15 lower tier municipalities in the region. Who's to say that they're doing the best possible thing that you can do? So I took the environmental scan of going 40 municipalities across the country and looking at the best practice across that to make sure that we're capturing the very best, and looking at larger cities that may not be comparable, but they're definitely putting in teams and solid efforts, such as Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary. And then we also used industry reports from Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, which is an organization that deals with grant making, and looking at other industry reports out of the US to see the leading edge of what people are doing. And these are all informed from long histories of grant making and trial and error and taking data, then iterating and improving. So that's really the process we took, if that answers your question.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deneau.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm just making sure you guys can hear me there.
We can.
Awesome. Okay. So my question is, if we receive multiple grant applications that come in the same time or within a period, and they're all similar in nature, and so I'll give an example, like the food bank, nutrition for learning, or food for kids. They're all serving the same purpose, but they do it in different ways. Are we able to give to all three, or do we kind of narrow it down to just one or none? And I guess it's possible the food bank is part of the tier 1 group, but just in general, this was just an example. Yeah.
So through the chair, that's a good question, and it's something that the review committee often has to grapple with in terms of organizations that are similar. So right now, within our criteria, there is no indicator or any component of the criteria where we need to differentiate what organizations are doing and what their objectives are and what their ultimate goals are. And so right now, there are several organizations that are doing similar things that are receiving either tier 2 or tier 1 funding. And in addition to that, as part of the sort of unified approach to both tier 2 and tier 1, those organizations are competing against completely different types of organizations. So if we're looking, nutrition for learning or food for kids is competing against a professional arts organization that's doing, that's providing like dance or something, they're all competing against each other. And so I think that is an important consideration as part of, but at the same time, the way that the criteria could be organized could account for those kinds of things in terms of if we are going to organize our grants by theme and do funding ratios and things like that. But right now, currently, there is no kind of way of differentiating those organizations.
Okay, thanks, Ellen, for the question. And remind me or correct me if I'm wrong. We receive the tier 1 grant information at budget time, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deneau. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this report. When it comes to the in-kind donations, is there an opportunity to distinguish between in-kind use of community centers versus in-kind use of a park, let's say?
So through the chair, there is a list of criteria that are open for use in terms of in-kind, and all of these things, all of the things that we have on offer that are rentable are included in the in-kind. And so you're...
Well, because, I understand that there are a lot more programs being run at the community centers, but if there's a park that is underutilized, I'm thinking of the Cherry Festival in particular, because I know the city works with the Cherry Park Neighborhood Association and provides in-kind services, like they waive some of the fees, et cetera. And it's done during a time when the park isn't being used. So I just hate to see the in-kind option disappearing or being removed.
Yeah, so just to clarify though, the in-kind wouldn't be removed, it would be replaced by cash. So if we were to discontinue in-kind, whatever the in-kind amount that the Cherry Park Neighborhood Association receives for that festival, they would receive that amount in cash, which they could then use to rent the park from the city.
So they give the
Yeah.
money back to the.
Because
okay.
I know that it sounds counterintuitive, but actually the process from an administrative perspective behind the scenes is so much more complicated than that in
Right.
terms of how the funding gets moved around and the whole process. And so, and it also gives them the opportunity to, you know, and I know this festival wouldn't change it, but it also gives the opportunity for organizations to change their location if they want to at the last minute. They're like, hey, we're actually expecting a much larger group, maybe we should move it to this park, so that they can then use that money to go anywhere they want, as opposed to being, you know, set with one location. Because that does happen actually quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I guess I'd just like to hear more about the in-kind as this moves forward. The other thing I wanted to comment on or a question is, I mean, I totally agree that we want greater clarification in the evaluation criteria, because I know that's lacking in the current process. There's, in the report, there's mention of a rubric, which could, I mean, when I think Mike Crawford mentioned the appeals. So I just worry that if we have a rubric, we're going to have more appeals. Because people are going to say, well, we checked this box and this box and this box and this box, and so why didn't we get the money, right? So I don't know if you're better to leave it open-ended rather than a rubric that could set us up for more appeals. Just a thought. I mean, I think there has to be criteria laid out, but I'd hate to see, you know, if you do this, it's 80% of your like a 80% towards your granting of this grant, and 20% would go to this. I just think we've got to be careful on what a rubric might look like or not.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair as a point. And I think, you know, we're not looking to, you know, move from one side to the other in terms of, you know, being confusing and unclear to something that's very rigid or, you know, really difficult to, you know, where there's no flexibility. So I don't think we're moving, like we're not, the best practices aren't really in that direction. It's more to help clarify what the criteria and the eligibility criteria and the way that proposals are actually being reviewed for applicants so that they can better understand. And that's really the point that we're trying to, you know, make with increasing the clarity and increasing, you know, adding rubrics and things like that, is to make it as fair as possible for all applicants, and also to ensure that they fully understand what it is that they're applying for. Because, you know, in some cases, the organizations who are applying are not actually even eligible for grants for whatever reasons and things like that. So we just want to, the first priority is to really make it a better process for the community members.
Yeah, and I'm sure many will appreciate it. So, thank you. I might keep back in later with some comments.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Davey.
Yes, thank you. I'll just make comment this time around. Most of my questions regarding the in-kind were answered. I think they were good questions. I just want to be clear, this, like, a lot of this I like. I also am not going to lie, I'm a little bit concerned because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it probably was, that the Tier 2 grants did seem like it was a lot of mess. There was a lot of council involvement, et cetera, and things have been very, very good. At least from my vantage, I haven't heard any people or any other members of council saying they're hearing from their constituents that this is an issue. So I want to be very, very careful when we look to potentially modify or change this. I also, at the risk of repeating myself, I think it's very, very important. Like, if I read this report as a new councillor, the first thing I would have said is, while we are not doing our job being equitable with the money that we give out. And that is, I'm not sure if that's council's fault for not including it in the first place or staff's fault, I don't really care. But the point is, I went through and read who can apply for the RISE fund, for example, and I could not tell the difference between that and Tier 2. It seemed like the exact same groups could apply for that. So on one hand, we have a report that's totally silent on that, that makes it sound like the City of Kitchener is not being equitable in our granting, when we have a fund that is something like 60, 70% of that total amount that only equity-seeking people can apply for, okay? So that's a really important bit of context when this comes back. And I do think that that has to be included as well as all other grants. There's probably others that I'm missing. So we understand, because if we have that one separate fund that only equity-seeking people can apply for, that's significant. And then we also put equity priority on the other fund, it starts to get messy and complicated, and that's where you start seeing some pushback. I am in favor of, cutting the red tape and simplifying things both for staff and the applicants, but to Councillor Ioannidis' point, this is one of those things too that as long as we're, again, being equitable in the application process with language barriers, et cetera, this isn't something I want to be overly simplified as well. If we're giving away, frankly, taxpayer dollars to community groups, I really see that as a bit of a filter to make sure that these people are doing some due diligence to get those dollars as well. So that's going to be looking forward when this comes back, and I do appreciate staff's work on this. Thanks.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try to focus on the comments as well, because again, there is no recommendation. I think that staff are probably looking to just get more feedback and then really drive a report from there. I think the important point is, again, I referenced this, the 1.77 million is quite a bit of money. I think the transparency around how we're funding, the organizations we're funding, it's not a matter of just the reporting. I think it needs to be widely advertised through our website or some component where residents can go actively and see all the great work that's happening across the city with various organizations that do receive ongoing funding from the City of Kitchener, and that level of support, that's grassroots support that's provided annually and for Tier 1 groups as well. And that includes support groups as well. We hear quite a bit, I think, actively advocacy from sports groups and saying, hey, you know, the city could do more. This way it allows us to reference and say, hey, yes, we are doing quite a bit, and yes, you can go actively seek funding also. The other is, I think we need to put the onus on expectation of data delivery from those organizations back to us. It's not about the eligibility of the requirement and they get funding, but it's also there's a responsibility on them to showcase exactly what the benefits derived from that funding was thereafter. That needs to be done on a regular basis. It can't be 5 years from now, 2, 3 years. It needs to be regularly. Each year funding comes. Just because you're in Tier 1 doesn't mean it's just automatic, and then it's expected for us to look back at you in 2 to 5 years. Every year needs to be reported what that money was spent towards, but more importantly, not just that, I know we do that, but what was the overall community benefit that was driven? How many people came? You know, how much service delivery was there? In the sports group, how many individuals that perhaps needed the extra support that couldn't actively participate in that particular sport, how many kids were able to be included? That's the type of data that needs to not just come as a consumption of this council, but needs to be readily and easily understood by the community at large. The other thing is about equity seeking. Look, Councillor Davies is a dollars and cents guy. So that's how he sees it, right? So I want to put a softer touch to what he's saying. And he's not wrong. I think we saw an inequity in funding. All of us took training on equity training and understood what difference between equality and equity is. And equity is where you give a group that needs the extra help that, stool to stand up on, and everyone can look over the fence. I understood that, and that's why I think the RISE fund was necessary for us. So where I think is we need to ensure, to Councillor Davies' point, not to lose the narrative and approach the whole equity lens into the overall funding, because we already have a dedicated RISE fund, is to, if the data shows that we need to support more than the 150, I'm all for it. But I don't think that we need to disfranchise the larger community that's already doing great work and hinder some of the ongoing work that they are doing. So I think we have to look at it very cautiously in that regard. So look at it holistically and how we can, I guess, expand the umbrella when possible. The later point is on clarity of strategic objectives. I love that idea. I can't be too long. I think it should be each term of council. So it can't be just once we figured it out and then decade afterwards we come back and have another, review of this all over again through a consultant. And some of this should be ongoing, that we review it in every term of council, looking at the face of council, what the objectives are. It should be updated according to what the needs of that community is. And council generally pinpoints the need for community, because we heard during the election process where the issues lie pertinent to a constituents, and that's why I think each term of council, this needs to be reflected, and this needs to be, then outlined to the applicants exactly where the funding streams need to be. Last part in-kind support. I only have 43 seconds, so I'm gonna be quick. A little cautious there, like Councillor Chapman. If the problem is each year, sometimes our cost of how we work in our fields and our community center, that changes, and that may not be sufficient with the funding that we're providing because we're not increasing the funding stream in the same pace. If it's working, let's not mess with it, or do it maybe as a pilot for some of the groups and see how it goes before we broaden it out towards the whole funding mechanism. So I would advise caution on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Ms. Morlock, did you have a comment or a question?
I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to respond very briefly to Councillor Singh's comments. So all of them very excellent points, and most of them are something that we've discussed at length as part of the review. So thank you for those comments. And I think I just wanted to clarify the issue around equity. This is not, so in terms of having the RISE fund and also embedding equity criteria, or not criteria, but embedding equity principles within this program, those two things don't necessarily have to be incompatible, because one of the things, if you think about what this could mean, is that organizations who have consistently received RISE funding, if we opened up Tier 1 funding to be a competitive process, those organizations could then apply for that pool of money and have multi-year agreements with the city and those kinds of things. Right now, that's not possible, and it's not just equity groups. Any newly established or emerging group that may be from an equity deserving group or not, no one has access to that funding. So in terms of an equity lens, we're not talking about embedding a separate stream or having, as you said, disenfranchising the rest of the community. It's really about ensuring that this funding envelope is available for the entire community. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Schneider, I'll go to you next since you haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, just comments. Thanks again for this report. Some great comments and observations around the horseshoe. And further kind of what Councillor Davey said, it would be great to highlight all the great things that we're doing. I can think of, in my ward this summer, we've had Play in the Park, and I know that's happened at other parks too, which I think is a great program, very equity-driven. Thoughts of maybe providing more to the RISE Fund, and just the thought of just some kind of being in this position, applying for grants with organizations. Wonder if we can keep maybe a percentage of funding back, because sometimes an opportunity comes up for a group after the deadline, but the event or opportunity will happen before the end of the year. So, if they weren't aware of something coming up before the deadline, if there's a way of holding a small percentage back, maybe that's something to consider there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the clarification on the equity piece. I wanted to say that I think everything we do at this council should be seen through an equity lens. So it's not sometimes over here, yes, and sometimes over here, not. So I think that's really important. I just wanted to say that I like the thought that's being put into looking at the clarity and the eligibility criteria, because I think that will help to hopefully allow a degree of distinction between the different grants that are out there, whether it be Love My Hood or the RISE or these community grants, just so that it's, and I know there'll be lots of overlap, but I think that will help applicants know whether they want to apply here or elsewhere. I greatly support the simplifying of the application process, because I've had to help with, this was before I was elected, with filling out an application form, and I think it's gotten to be even more arduous than it was back then. But I think, I'm not saying, get rid of the application process, and of course we need that information, but simplifying it a bit would, I know, be well received by community groups. I've already spoken to the in-kind and the rubric. I just want to say that, I've heard over and over again the need for more funding, and I know that's not part of this report, but I hope that's something that we can all consider in the future. And just the other thing I wanted to comment on was organizing by themes. I think that is a good idea, as long as it doesn't, and not that you've said it does, and I don't think it says so in the report, but if we were to organize by themes, I would hope it wouldn't limit or reduce the number of organizations that would get funding, but it would just, maybe if it's say a rugby, I don't know, just say a rugby team, and there are 3 rugby teams, I would hope it wouldn't just limit it to just one rugby team would be getting funding, but that it could maybe be distributed among the 3, for example. But as you said, it would make that category or that theme make more sense, right? So I like that idea too. So yeah, I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Councillor Nettis?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Vermanovic. I think I'm supportive with the direction that I feel like this is where it's going. I'm supportive of looking at not that automatic funding with Tier 1. I think that's the right direction to go. I'm supportive of the direction towards having more transparency. And I am supportive of having less intrusive application process, because I know how it's like when it comes to apply for funding from levels of government. But I want to be clear that I want it to be tied to some form of how the community benefits, and as Councillor Singh had mentioned, what's the community impact? I want to know where our dollars are going, and because consistently what I'm hearing from residents is more and more they're getting more and more concerned with the amount of dollars that are being spent, and are we scrutinizing the amount of dollars we're spending, and not just for this, but for everything else that we're doing. So, but I am very supportive of where this is going. I think it's going in the right direction. And if I for the in-kind portion, if I gather this correctly, and what I think it is, it's going to eliminate the internal problems that we have internally on who pays for what internally. If that's where I think that's where this is going, then I think that's fabulous, and I'm good with it.
Sorry, Ms. Morlag, hang on. Go ahead.
Sorry. So that's definitely part of it, but there's also been headaches for community organizations as well, who can't get the facility that they thought they could, or they can't, they've changed the date of their event, and now their event is the same weekend as a big, the Blues Fest or a big event that's happening, and
then they don't get the money.
they don't have access.
I think it's good. I think it's good.
It's both.
I think council just needs to wrap around it a little bit better to understand, but I think I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I think it's the right direction.
Okay, all others have made their comments. I'll maybe make a few myself as well. I too want to thank staff and the consultant for their work on this. This is an important program for us, because it's one that allows us to build community, and allows us to build community and capitalize on community expertise, number one. in areas that we maybe don't have. And secondly, it allows us to often offer things in a more cost-effective way than maybe we can, as an example. And I'll just go back to years ago when we started looking at getting into the special event business. And initially, we hired a consultant, spent a couple $100,000 back in 1996, I think it was, which was a lot of money back then. And while we had two great events, we learned that they weren't sustainable without the community grassroots involvement to make them happen. And now we do a mixture of things, but we find that some of we have lots of great successful events, but some of our really successful ones, and sure, there's work and effort in partnerships to make things happen, but they're the ones where we actually can partner with the community to do that. I think part of, and this is where Councillor Davey was going at, over the last number of years, I think part of our success has been that we haven't been, other than a long form, we've had a process that wasn't overly bureaucratic, it wasn't political, we had an internal staff team that looked at things, but we haven't had any major complaints. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we look at things going forward. I think, and on the point around best practices, yes, it's important to look at that, but sometimes, in fact, maybe we're the ones that actually have the best practices and others haven't gotten there yet. And so I think that we need to keep that in mind as we look at that. And in other instances, sometimes some things are right for our community and not necessarily for others. I do get the piece around, and I'm supportive of a shorter form. We probably don't need 17 pages, and we probably shouldn't have 3 pages, because accountability is incredibly important. So something in the middle is probably the sweet spot. I'll let others figure out what that sweet spot is between 3 and 17. Because accountability is key, as others have indicated. We are using public dollars when we make these investments, and so we want to make sure that folks are accountable. I do like the piece about aligning with our strategic priorities. I think that's good. But we also need some consistency going from term to term to council. Like you can't see wholesale change between each term. That would be a problem. And we also need to think about, particularly for groups that transition into a longer-term arrangement, that there is some sort of transition period going forward for them, and they're simply not cut off. With the program that we've had right now, 5 years got you into Tier 1, and then you were there. I think we still do need some sort of capacity to have, after a few years, you do get maybe into a 3-year cycle, or maybe, or something. But it's got to be something that is reasonable and still has points where they have to come back in to align with priorities, and it's not in perpetuity. As I said, transparency and accountability, I think, as we go forward is key. I'm not sure about dividing into categories, because once we divide into categories, and if they're very set and fixed, depending on application intake and what we get and what we don't get and quality of applications, particularly if there isn't council engagement in it, it can become problematic. But I do think that we need something to support startup organizations and so on going forward. The last point is just on the in-kind. I understand the issue, but the reality is, if we still give those grants, and if they use city facilities, there's still going to be internal billing for those things. So that's not going to stop and go away. The only thing it will allow them to do is go and take those dollars that would normally come into a city facility and put it into external facilities.
The cash, take care of that, goes to that department, to the right departments?
No, the point, Councillor Ioannidis, is that with the in-kind, I think we just need to look at it that if we're going to make a change, I think the priority should be that those dollars first come back to city facilities where that's feasible before they go to other facilities in the community. Because if all of a sudden folks have the cash and they start taking those dollars elsewhere, we might in fact have revenue shortfalls in those city facilities, depending on the amount of dollars that we're talking about. So those are just my thoughts and reflections, and I know today was really just about asking questions and providing input as staff goes away and does additional work. But that appears to be everyone, so just want to thank you, Ms. Morlag, and staff that were part of the process, Mr. Crawford, and look forward to the ongoing dialogue going forward. So with that, motion to go in camera for the noted item, please. Moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Schneider. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Michaud, Councillor O'Dooney, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you.